You woke up before the rest of the house. The kitchen floor was cold under your feet, the kind of cold that only exists in early morning before a home had a chance to warm up again. You shuffled to the front door and turned the handle quietly so you would not wake anyone. And there it was, sitting on the porch step in the pale gray light. 2 glass bottles, beaded with condensation. The cream had risen to the top in a thick white layer. You picked them up, one in each hand, feeling the weight and the chill against your palms. You brought them inside without thinking twice about it. That was just how milk arrived. It came to you. For most Americans alive today who are over the age of 60, that memory is completely real. For everyone younger, it sounds almost like something from a fairy tale. And in a way, it is, because the milkman, that quiet and dependable figure who moved through neighborhoods before sunrise and left fresh dairy on your doorstep, is almost entirely gone now. Not slowly fading, gone. And the world that made him possible is gone along with him. The short explanation is simple enough, the supermarket one. Refrigerators got bigger, cars became universal, and somewhere in the 1960s and 70s, Americans decided it was easier to buy a gallon of milk during the weekly grocery run than to keep a standing order with a dairy. But that explanation, while true, leaves out everything that actually mattered about it. It leaves out the whole texture of a daily life built around freshness, routine, and a kind of quiet trust between a neighborhood and the people who served it. To understand the milkman, you have to go back to the late 1800s. Back then, delivering milk to homes was not a quaint tradition. It was a public health necessity. Before refrigerators were common in households, milk spoiled fast. Cities were growing rapidly, families no longer lived near farms, and the journey from a cow to a kitchen table was long enough to be genuinely dangerous. Contaminated milk killed children. It was a documented crisis. Home delivery was part of the solution. The dairy would bottle the milk fresh, load it into insulated wagons, horse-drawn at first, and get it to homes as quickly as possible, often before sunrise, so it could be brought inside before the day heated up. By the early decades of the 20th century, the milkman had become one of the most familiar figures in American neighborhood life. He was not just a delivery driver, he was a routine. Most families had a standing order, so many quarts of whole milk, perhaps a pint of cream, butter on Tuesdays. Some dairies offered cottage cheese, eggs, orange juice, even bread. You left a note in the empty bottles if you needed something different that week, or if you were going on vacation and wanted to pause your service. The milkman would read it, adjust accordingly, and leave whatever you asked for. There was no app, no confirmation email, just a handwritten note and an understanding that it would be handled. The glass bottles themselves were part of the system. You did not buy them, you borrowed them. When you brought in the full ones, you rinsed the empties and set them back on the step. The milkman collected them on the next visit. Those bottles went back to the dairy, were sterilized, refilled, and returned to circulation. It was a closed loop, efficient in a way that felt almost invisible because it was simply the normal way things were done. For a family in, say, 1952, this was woven into the fabric of every morning. The children knew the sound of the milk truck, or in earlier years, the sound of a horse's hooves on the pavement. Mothers planned meals around what was fresh. The cream on the top of the bottle was real cream, not homogenized away. Some families would quietly compete over who got the first pour, skimming that rich layer off for their coffee or their oatmeal. It was a small luxury that arrived every single morning without anyone having to do anything to earn it that day. The milkmen themselves were often young men working routes that started at 2 or 3 in the morning. By the time most of the neighborhood sat down for breakfast, they had already delivered hundreds of bottles and were heading home. The work was physical, lifting crates, moving quickly through the cold and the dark, learning the habits of each household on the route. A good milkman knew which families took extra on the weekends. He knew which elderly widow needed someone to check that her bottles from the day before had actually been brought inside. There are stories, more than a few of them, of milkmen who noticed something was wrong, an order not taken in, a light left burning all night, and they quietly raised an alarm. They were, in a very real sense, part of the social fabric of a street. The decline began gradually and then at once. The post-war boom brought two things that changed everything: the modern refrigerator and the automobile. As refrigerators grew larger and more reliable, the urgency of daily fresh delivery faded. A family could now buy 4 or 5 days' worth of milk at once and store it safely. And as car ownership spread and suburban supermarkets multiplied, the weekly shopping trip became the new American ritual. You drove to the store, filled a cart, and came home with everything you needed for the week. A separate daily delivery system began to feel like something extra, something no longer necessary. There were economic pressures as well. Homogenization and pasteurization, while genuine improvements in safety, also made milk a standardized product, one that fit easily on a grocery shelf, alongside 100 other items. Dairies that had once depended on home delivery routes found that selling in bulk to supermarkets was simply more efficient. The cost of maintaining a fleet of trucks, employing dozens of drivers, and managing thousands of individual household accounts started to look very high compared to the alternative. By the late 1960s, home milk delivery had dropped from covering roughly 30% of American households to under 10%. By the 1980s, it was a rarity. Today, it exists only in small pockets, a handful of regional dairies, some organic operations, and it's a premium service now, a deliberate choice rather than simply the way the world worked. What replaced it was efficiency, and efficiency is not a small thing. It made food cheaper and more accessible in ways that genuinely mattered. But something else went with the milkman that efficiency could not replace. It was the dailiness of it, the sense that someone was attending to your household on a regular schedule, whether you remembered to think about it or not. The empty bottles on the step were a small ritual of completion, something used, something returned, something renewed. There was a quiet accountability built into it, a loop of giving and receiving that connected a family to a larger network of people doing specific, reliable, honest work. There's also the particular silence of those early mornings. It's hard to describe to someone who never heard it. The sound of glass bottles set carefully on a porch step, the soft rumble of a truck moving slowly down a sleeping street, the cold that came into the house for just a moment when the door opened, and then the warmth closing back around you as you carried the bottles to the kitchen. It was such a small thing. It happened every day. And that's exactly why no one thought to remember it until it was already over. If you grew up with milk delivery, or if someone in your family did, leave a comment below. There's something worth preserving in those small recollections, not because the past was better, but because the texture of daily life tells us something about who we were and what we quietly valued. If this kind of history is something you want more of, consider subscribing. New videos go up every week, and they're always about the ordinary things that shaped everyday American life, the ones that slipped away before anyone had the chance to say goodbye.